Hello, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. So the webinar with Veritas is going to be focusing on reducing TCO through effective cloud management. So my name's Amy Hammond, I work in the marketing team at Bytes, and I'm pleased to be joined by Matt Brown from Veritas, who is going to be presenting the webinar for you guys today. But just before I pass over to Matt, just going to go through some housekeeping details with you all really quickly. So you are muted throughout the webinar today, but there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions, just submit them in the questions box just at the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll answer them either throughout or at the end of the webinar for you. And we're also recording the webinar today, so I'll send you all a link to the recording this afternoon or tomorrow morning. And there's a really short feedback form at the end, so if you'd like any further information or if you'd like to request a call back from our specialist here, just pop that in there and we will get back to you. Okay, so I'm now going to pass you over to Matt.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Brown. I'm a technical specialist for Veritas, based here in London, in the UK. My specialism is cloud and automation. That means I work with cloud service providers like AWS, Azure, Google, or private cloud platforms like Nutanix, or where someone's doing some OpenStack and that kind of thing. Today, I've been asked to talk to you about reducing TCO through effective cloud data management, and more specifically, long-term retention with Veritas NetBackup and CloudCatalyst, and how you can start that effective cloud data management using CloudCatalyst. Bit of housekeeping of my own to kick off with. There will be a little bit around futures and roadmap in that, so I just need to make you all aware about any forward-looking statements shouldn't be used to make buying decisions, etc., etc. You can take a look at that. I'll bring it up again before the actual futures section later on. Just to lay out my agenda for you here today, we're going to start off with a bit of a scene setting, give a bit of context around Veritas, data management, and long-term retention, what we mean by that. Then we're going to go into the meat of it about backup to the cloud, and specifically CloudCatalyst, get into a little bit of technical detail and some high-level architecture stuff. Then we're going to briefly take a look at the futures, what you can do with your data once you put it into public cloud. And then ultimately we'll end up with a bit of Q&A at the end if we have time, a bit of back and forth. Questions very much appreciated for that. So Veritas, just to give you a bit of context on Veritas and set the scene. You're probably on this call because you're aware of NetBackup, or you're a NetBackup user, and you know, the data protection is very much the core of what Veritas do. You might be less aware about our availability products, keeping mission critical workloads available 24/7, moving data around, and our insights products for visualization and classification, reporting, analytics, compliance, that kind of thing. The idea of this is we're bringing these products together to create an enterprise data services platform that's effective wherever your data has to reside, whether it's on-premise, an edge location, or a multi-cloud environment. So about Veritas and the cloud. So a little anecdote for you I like to tell. This year, Veritas had a very large presence at the AWS Summit at the Excel Arena. Last year, it had a very small presence that was me. I just started at Veritas and I'd already booked to go down there. So I went and had a look around and talked to a few people. And as I sat down for the keynote, I sat down next to a gentleman who had a lanyard that said DevOps engineer on it. And he got chatting to me and said, "Who do you work for?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I've heard for Veritas. What are you doing here? Why would you be here? You're on-prem only." And well, I told him, actually, we do quite a lot with public cloud. We put a lot of data into public cloud. We've got a lot of integrations. And of course, just because your data's in public cloud doesn't mean you don't need to back it up. Well, he said, "I don't need to back it up. Why would I need to do that?" And I asked him who backed up his data, and he told me AWS did. Well, I wonder how he felt when the AWS backup product was launched. I've certainly presented with people from AWS before, and they're quite happy to tell you that backing up your data in public cloud is very much your responsibility. And if you read the shared responsibility model from AWS, that'll be fairly clear, I'd hope. But when we're talking about Veritas and the cloud, Veritas has always been well positioned for a variety of reasons, because they've always been about heterogeneity, support for different technologies, old and new. They've always been software defined, agnostic to the hardware and infrastructure platforms. But most of all, they focus on data, which is what matters most. And if you look on the solution spaces and marketplaces for the public cloud vendors here, you'll see we've got a wide portfolio of products advertised up there. And especially with AWS, we actually have several products that are officially endorsed by them. And that endorsement program actually has quite a high bar. It means that our technologies have been put in front of their architects and they've given us a grilling, and in some cases they've asked us to change things before they'll give their endorsement. And it's a similar kind of thing on the Microsoft Azure marketplace as well. You see that Microsoft have us there as a preferred solution for NetBackup. Our products are up there on the marketplace. You can deploy them using ARM templates. They have a slightly different program for working with technology partners. They're not necessarily endorsed as such. But you can see we've got a large presence here, and we're doing a lot with them all the time. It was only last week I was in Madrid at our technical forum where Microsoft were diamond sponsors of that, and I did a presentation with AWS. So we're doing a lot, not just the backup to the cloud, but also the protection of data in the cloud, the visibility of data in the cloud, and making applications in the cloud highly available as well. So when we're talking to our cloud service providers, this is typically what they're telling us about seeing their cloud customer journey. Is that customers are starting off at a project level where they're just doing one or two little things, maybe a bit of test and bev, maybe just putting a bit of data up there, and they're kind of getting their toes wet, seeing what's going on. And then they move into a foundation level where they sort of understand things a bit more, and they need to lay down the foundations of how their version of how they work with public cloud looks. Then they go into a migration phase where they start moving their applications up into public cloud, and eventually they get into the reinvention phase where they're able to reinvent what they're doing, make it more suited to public cloud, use more cloud native technologies, and really get the best out of it. And if you apply this to data management and the solutions that Veritas support here, you'll notice that backup to cloud, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is there at the far left, and that's really quite a low-hanging fruit for customers to grab hold of and get to grips with using public cloud. Because it's not just about IT getting to grips with it. There's other aspects such as finance and legal that need to get their head around how to work with public cloud. One of the biggest mind shifts is going from CapEx to OpEx. And for some of the services like internet connectivity and power and stuff, you might already be doing that. But why not storage and compute? So when we're talking about backup to cloud, we're talking about specifically here, the primary use case being long-term retention. And now you've probably all got different definitions of what we mean by long-term retention. Different organizations do different things. They have different SLAs that they've agreed with the business. Or what I hear a lot is that's what we've always done. We've always done it like this. This is our rough time we have, our rough RPO for getting data restored. And why would we change it if that's what everyone's been happy with? I would ask if it's an optimal use of resources and if it really meets the business needs, and are you doing as much as you could with your data? But for the purposes of this conversation, I usually define long-term retention as anything that isn't required for operational restore. So anything that you're only retaining for compliance purposes. So it could be stuff that you need to check a box that you're keeping it, but you never actually intend to restore. Or it could be that it's just anything backed up more than so many days ago, depending on your business requirements, 14, 30, 60 days, whatever. I guess what you might do is take a look at how often you actually restore stuff that's been backed up for a certain period and have a think about that, and whether you could move that data off to a lower tier where you can pay less money to keep it rather than having ready to do an operational restore. So when we're talking about backup to the cloud, yeah, we've just been talking about what long-term retention is. It might be that you need to add a second offsite copy for some reason. That people are also doing it for disaster recovery, and I'll go into that a little bit later. That's something we'll briefly mention in the futures section. It could be you just need to expand on-site storage for backups for a period of time, but it's also an easy way to start the cloud journey and to show that you're moving an amount of data into public cloud if you've got some cloud first policy or pressure from above to start using public cloud. Now, the technologies that I'm going to be talking about today specifically are Veritas NetBackup and the Cloud Catalyst media server that can come with it, can be integrated with it. But there are actually a few ways you can send data to public cloud with NetBackup. For a long time, there's been the possibility to use public cloud as an OST target. That's just natively send data straight through from a media server. The main disadvantages of that is that you get no deduplication. You're moving full fat images up to public cloud. The second way is what I'm going to be talking about today is the Cloud Catalyst, and I'll go into a bit more detail about that shortly. There are other options that people have used using the AWS storage gateway or other similar technologies, or a BTL gateway, and that we're seeing customers doing that less and less and less. So I'm not going to go into those kind of things, but people do it. I should briefly mention that supporting cloud infrastructure that you'd need to know about to put this kind of thing together. Whatever cloud vendor you'd be using, and you can use a lot with the Veritas Cloud Catalyst, 40 plus in fact. You need to know something about their object storage, its availability, durability, figures, that kind of thing, how much you're paying for it, how it actually works. You're going to need to know a little bit about how the access and identity things work, such as AWS IAM or Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And you're going to want to have a good think about their connectivity options. You can just connect straight over the internet if you want, if your security people are up for that. You can set up a VPN in and then go that route. Or you could, if you're already using public cloud and you've got something like a direct connect or an express route for Azure set up, you can use that as well and use some of the bandwidth there to send your backups up to public cloud. These are all things that you're going to want to have a think about and consider once you know more about the general solution. So what is a Cloud Catalyst? Cloud Catalyst is a NetBackup media server that integrates with Veritas data protection software to natively write data to the public cloud. It's available as a physical appliance or a software-defined solution that you can install on your own operating system. But the key to it really is no rehydration in sending that data to public cloud. So if you were using some kind of third-party gateway, as detailed in this diagram, you would be getting sending deduplicated data for your backup to a NetBackup media server, and then when it sent the data to the cloud gateway, it would have to rehydrate that data to the full front end amount of data that was originally backed up, rather than the deduped amount of data that you would be storing on the NetBackup media server. With Cloud Catalyst, you don't have to rehydrate that data. You're only going to send the unique blocks that you sent from your clients to the media servers into public cloud, which means that you can get up to 95% dedupe on your data, thus saving you a lot of money on your long-term retention storage costs. And the overall architecture for how we implement this is fairly straightforward, really. Here's a typical on-premise customer data center diagram, although you can see it could also be a public cloud VNet or VPC, where you've got some workload servers, you've got a NetBackup set up with a master server and some media servers, and you can have as many as you want, throughput allowing, of those media servers sending data into that Cloud Catalyst, which will then send those deduplicated blocks of data up to the Cloud Object Store, fully encrypted, encrypted at rest, encrypted in transit. As I said, you have a choice of 40 plus different cloud providers, besides the ones listed here. The ones off the top of my head I know of are Oracle Cloud, various IBM clouds, also things like Hitachi HCP and EMC ECS, and on-premise object stores are also compatible. And you also see there I've got the Veritas Access Appliance, which is Veritas's own long-term retention NAS device, that's also an object store that's very good for saving large amounts of data for long-term retention. So simply the way it works is that your operational backups go to the NetBackup media service as usual, where the data there would be used for operational restores, and then the data that's not required is tiered down as part of a storage lifecycle policy onto the Cloud Catalyst. And when that's happening, that job to move the data onto Cloud Catalyst doesn't complete until all of the blocks of data are up in the Cloud Object Store, just to make sure that you've got that offsite copy. So the typical use case for this technology that we're finding is, and this is a bit of a typical customer example around tape replacement. So if a customer's got 100 terabytes of data, doing an on-site backup with 0 to 60 days, typically what they might be doing if they're sending things to tape for long-term retention is they've got a tape library, they've got lots of tapes, they have to deal with the handling and letting the tape guy in, or taking in the tapes and moving them from the tape library, then moving them off to the state storage, something like Iron Mountain or another site or something like that. And backup admin has to organize all of this stuff and run around taking care of it all. So quite simply, the idea is to go from that to a situation where you've kind of automated the process, to putting in a Cloud Catalyst, using the public Cloud Object Store, and now your backup admin can call himself a cloud admin to some extent. We've had people do some TCO analysis on this, and over a 5-year period, they can show up to 2 times return on your investment for 100 terabytes of data. So it can be quite a saving. So now I'm going to go into some of the considerations around how you would put in a Cloud Catalyst solution with NetBackup. Some things to think about, some little technical details here and there. How does Cloud Catalyst work? It's essentially an open storage target for NetBackup. So a media server working as an open storage target. It should be noted that there's a 1-to-1 ratio between Cloud Catalyst devices and object store buckets. So you can't have one Cloud Catalyst firing up to lots of different AWS buckets, or an AWS bucket and an Azure blob. It has to be a 1-to-1. They're very much in that relationship together. Currently in NetBackup 8.1.2, it writes in 64 meg objects plus 5 times 128k metadata objects. So you get 6 puts for every 64 meg you write up. Now, the puts and the gets and the selects, etc., aren't necessarily too much of a consideration with NetBackup and Cloud Catalyst. That there's going to be a slight overhead, not really much more than 1 or 2% in terms of putting those putting that data up and the metadata objects to go with it. The reason it's a consideration and people ask about it is because the cloud service providers typically charge you for those puts and selects and gets. So one of the key things about Cloud Catalyst, it doesn't keep the data warm by constantly going and looking at it. You just have to do the put when you put the data up, or the get when you get it back, and the rest of the time it's kept cold, not warmed up by things checking bits and that kind of thing. NetBackup 8.2 actually improves on this somewhat. So it's only 2 puts per 64 meg. That gives you a performance improvement and a slight saving on the amount of puts you're going to use to put the data up there. And as I mentioned earlier, the storage lifecycle policy only completes once the backup data is in the cloud, so you know you've got that offsite copy. If we move on, we can take a little look at something about the sizing considerations. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but there's essentially 3 things to consider here. There's the bandwidth going into the Cloud Catalyst. There's the speed at which Cloud Catalyst can write to its disks. And then there's the speed at which Cloud Catalyst can write to the cloud. So this is kind of to illustrate the factors that you should consider here. You've got the A, the input speed, B, the writing to the disk bandwidth, and C, the writing to the cloud bandwidth. I would imagine in most cases that the limiting factor is going to be how fast you can send that data up to the cloud. But it might be, depending on how you size things, the ability to write the data into the cache on the Cloud Catalyst. I would have thought most cases people would be able to give the internal bandwidth in their data center to the device that it needs. But of course, if there's lots of media servers here on the left sending data into that Cloud Catalyst, ultimately it might get to the situation where you can't add enough compute power or storage performance to that Cloud Catalyst to enable it to process the data. So you might want to break it out into several Cloud Catalysts if you've got a lot of data that you need to get up to public cloud quickly. And usually if it's a long-term retention job, that's not likely to be the case. So one of the first choices you're going to have to make is choosing your cloud object store storage class. And that's kind of even before that, you might want to have a think about which cloud storage provider you wish to work with. You might already have an existing relationship. You might not. You might think that even though you have an account with one cloud storage provider, you might want to send your data to a different cloud storage provider. They're just some things to think about. Pricing, access times, retrieval costs are going to be a major thing you're going to want to have a think about. So if we look at this example for AWS, you can see that there's 6 different choices you have for cloud object storage with AWS S3. The usual standard option, their intelligent tiering option, where it moves older data down to a lower tier. It still gives you the same access times, but charges you slightly less for those older blocks, but then you pay a monitoring fee per object. There's the standard IA, which is often a choice we see. That's the infrequent access. So you pay slightly less for the storage, but the retrieval fee is slightly higher. There's things around minimum storage duration and the minimum object size that might become factors. Then there's one zone IA. That's kind of interesting because you might want to consider whether the copies that AWS S3 makes of your data. So it's keeping it redundant through various data centers, through S3 standard intelligent sharing and IA. But with one zone, it's only keeping it in one availability zone. But what you might decide is that actually that's fine, because you're going to also make another copy to another cloud provider or another AWS region using another Cloud Catalyst and keeping your data management under NetBackup. So just something to think about there. New in NetBackup 8.2, which is expected to be released in July. And I'd like to remind you of the second slide I showed around forward-looking statements. We're expecting support for S3 Glacier and S3 Glacier Deep Archive. Now, these become really interesting. If you look at the $ per gigabyte costs here, for Deep Archive, it's works out to be something like $1 per terabyte per month. Now, if you're getting 95% dedupe on that, that could be $20 per, $1 per 20 terabytes per month, which becomes a seriously cheap way to store data in public cloud, and quite a strong competitor against tape or other ways of storing data. Of course, there's a penalty that comes with that, and that is that getting it back will take 12 to 48 hours, depending on the level of service you selected, and you're going to have to pay a reasonable amount of a reasonable amount of money in retrieval fees should you want to get that back. But if you've got a use case that is very much around, we just need to tick a box to say we've still got it, but actually we know we're never going to ever touch it, that's definitely a very good option. The same goes for Azure, though. You know, they've got their hot and cold tier blobs. Usually it's cold tier because of the small number of objects we're putting up. I think they've got an archive tier coming out. I haven't looked at Azure closely too much in the last few months, but similarly, other cloud providers all have their object stores. I've just used AWS here as an example. One thing to mention, though, is that if you were planning, once you've set the type of bucket you're going to use, the type of object store, you've selected S3 Standard, or you've selected S3 Glacier, you are stuck with that choice. You can't do a migration between them. What you would have to do is pull the data back down and then put it all back up. Now, that might be something you want to do, but you would have to have a good think about the egress charges you would incur for pulling that data out of public cloud. So deployment considerations for Cloud Catalyst. You've got a choice of connectivity. This is going to be one of the first things you're going to want to think about. You can just connect it over the internet straight up to the Cloud Object Store, like you could access from your web browser, an object in an object store. There's nothing wrong with that. It's encrypted. The data is encrypted at rest. But typically, we find that people want to connect over Direct Connect, especially if they're doing other things in their data center up to public cloud, or they're actually moving some workloads into a public cloud. They might, as an interim measure, use VPN, and if the security people insisted on it. But typically, it'd be something like Direct Connect or ExpressRoute to guarantee the bandwidth and allow other data to go up there. You can, on AWS Direct Connect, actually advertise the public IP on your local router using BGP. So moving from that over the internet connection to the direct connection can be quite simple. There's a couple of other options around using a VPC endpoint if you're using a VPN, and you can do some crazy things with alternate ports if really required. And then you can, of course, if you are running your workloads in public cloud and you're running NetBackup in public cloud, you can have that NetBackup environment connect directly into the object store from the public cloud, and we're seeing a lot of customers doing that. And because the object store is a much cheaper level of storage than the block storage services in public cloud, we often find that they're lowering the operational restore backup on block storage and getting things off into the object store as quickly as possible, because of course their media servers up there in public cloud, they've got quite a high level of bandwidth to pull the data back should they require it. So that's definitely something to think about if you're putting an environment into public cloud and you're protecting the data with NetBackup. We've got some advice around architectures and how we're seeing customers put NetBackup into public cloud and make the best use of the storage services they've got available. Once you've chosen your connectivity, you might want to think about the choice of form factor. Veritas actually sell a Cloud Catalyst physical appliance that has a 14 terabyte cache. That's what we're seeing most customers do who have a reasonable amount of data. But you can also buy a Veritas virtual appliance that's deployed on VMware as an OVA file. That comes as standard with 1 terabyte of cache. The 14 terabyte physical appliance, as it says at the bottom here, supports up to a 1 petabyte of object storage in the cloud. But you can also build your own VM. If you do a bit with Red Hat, and you can install Red Hat 7.3 or a higher version. I don't think 8 is on the support list yet. Be careful of that. You're quite welcome to build your own machine, or even build your own physical appliance. And in public cloud, that's what people are doing. If they're running NetBackup in AWS or Azure, they're building their own Cloud Catalyst VM. And that gives you quite a bit of flexibility around the sizing, how much memory and CPU you give it, so you can really tune it to support your exact requirements a lot more closely. But of course, you might prefer using the Veritas appliance, a virtual appliance on premise, if you're a VMware user and you like the appliance form factor and the simplicity that comes with that. As far as minimum specs go, if you are tuning that build your own, we're seeing customers deploy it in quite a small level in some cases, but it's best to probably check with support and get a support exception if you are going to do something with less than 1 terabyte of cache. Here's one of the most important factors to remember. When we've spoken to our support people, they say that the biggest number of support questions they get about is people who changed the permissions on the account that governs what NetBackup can do with the cloud object storage. Respect these permissions and do not change them, because it will likely end up in a support case where you'll be told to change them back. I think the reason is that the way it works when you're deploying is that you set up an account, you put those credentials into NetBackup, and then NetBackup sets up the bucket for you. What it doesn't do is although some of our consultants and some people have done this, is that you can set up a bucket and then attach NetBackup. The preferred way of working is to get the credentials, put them into NetBackup, and let NetBackup set up your object store, whether it's S3 in AWS or Azure Blob. So respect Lord Buckethead and his permissions, otherwise you might end up with support. So overall, the deployment steps are pretty straightforward. Deploy and patch your Cloud Catalyst, whatever form factor you're choosing. Get those latest patches, and there's some performance fixes in there that are definitely worth getting in. Add it to your NetBackup domain. Ensure you've got the connectivity to your cloud service provider, i.e. that the ports are open. You probably don't want to go through a proxy server if you're just sending lots of backup data to public cloud. It might just put unnecessary load of trying to inspect encrypted data on your proxy server, so I'd probably avoid that. You're going to want to configure the subscription account, i.e. the AWS IAM role with your cloud service provider. Make sure that's set up with the permissions that we just detailed. And then you go into NetBackup and you configure the Cloud Catalyst to talk to the S3 bucket or Azure blob with a container with a name of your choice, and NetBackup sets up the bucket, as I was saying. Then what you'll do is set up your storage lifecycle policy so that it moves data from the media server deduplication pool through to the Cloud Catalyst server, and by extension up to the Cloud Object Store. Just a reminder there that when you are moving that data up to Cloud Catalyst, it's not going to complete that storage lifecycle policy moving job until all the data is in public cloud. That way you can be sure that your data is properly off-sited. And then I guess you can watch the objects appear in public cloud and show that your data is actually up there. It'll all be encrypted, so you can't do anything with it yet. A little bit more on that in a bit. And you shouldn't try and mess with it. Absolutely do not go in there and move the files or rename or delete them or change the bucket lifecycle policy or anything like that. You may want to apply auditing onto the object store to make sure you know what's happened to it. But considering those are permissions and who actually has access to that data is quite important, especially if you want to maintain a sort of air gap between your infrastructure people and your backup data, to make sure that there's a malevolent force or some malware or a rogue actor getting access to your systems. They might be able to do things to your infrastructure, but the backups are kept in a separate account that's far away from everything else, so they'll never get at those. So a little bit reminder of the statement about forward-looking statements. If you could all take a quick read of this. We're very close to the release of 8.2 now, so I am expecting this to be part of it, but as it says here, should not be relied upon in making purchasing decisions and may not be incorporated into any contract. So what's really interesting is that in the next version of NetBackup, what we're looking to enable our customers to do is to take that highly deduplicated data that's been sent up to a cloud object store, and in this case, the first release is AWS S3 and AWS EC2, but Azure is planned for the next release. And enable to take that data, those images of VMs or physical servers that have been moved up and put away for long-term retention, moved and stored in really the most efficient manner. We're going to allow those to be recovered into AWS. So it'll do a conversion that convert that data, those images, into EBS volumes and allow you to spark up your on-premise servers as EC2 instances in AWS. Now this is really quite powerful because there's lots of different use cases. If you've got a low RPO, RTO, DR requirement, then this could work really, really well for DR. We have customers with compliance concerns about how they have a backup of a server and they need to not just be able to restore the data, but restore the application so people can get at the data. So that's quite an interesting use case. It might be that you just want to use things for test or do some development work, or someone's got an idea about something to do with data or an application and you want to spark it up into an environment, do something with it, have a play around, maybe test patching things to see if it causes a problem, maybe test a new version of code and how to install it. Lots of different things you could do to really extract some value from that backup data. and not just leave it there lying dormant. So in summary, we've been through some stuff about the architecture, the sizing, working out how much bandwidth you might want to put in, how big a cache you want, selecting your form factor, whether you want to go build your own or you want to buy an appliance, or whether it be a virtual or physical appliance. Talked a little bit about the connectivity, the options you have there using VPN or direct connect or just going straight out of the internet. A little bit about the bucket, your different choices you have about different types of cloud object storage and the different providers, of course. And then there's, of course, the account subscription considerations. The security considerations should probably be top of the list to really understand who has permission to access that data. We do see a lot of customers actually have an entirely different subscription for their long-term retention data and their backup data that they're sending into public cloud, so that anybody playing around, anybody from the DevOps team having a good play in EC2 doesn't have access to that data, so they're properly separated. And so once you've deployed and configure it, the next step typically is that rather than just recall all the tapes and go through a lengthy process of sucking the data out and pushing it back up through Cloud Catalyst, mostly what we see is customers look at it and decide that actually it's best to just wind down the legacy backup. And if they need to get rid of a tape drive, you know, we have partners we work with who can help with these legacy restore processes in some, you know, often they're data recovery companies who have every kind of tape drive going, and if you really need to get some of the data on those old tapes, you can send it to them and they'll send you a disk. And once you've made the leap and you've got that data go up in public cloud, you can make use of the new features and hopefully use it to restore some machine images into public cloud and really get some value out of your data once it's up there. And in the long term, the strategy for Veritas going forward is to work out ways of giving our customers the most value of that data rather than just letting it lie dormant. So at this point, I'd like to see if we've got any questions.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. So yeah, if you do have any questions at all, there is a questions box in the control panel, which is just the right hand side of your screen. So if you type them in there, I'll read those out for Matt. So just wait a couple of minutes, see if any come through.
Can I ask a question then? Of the people on the call, how many do we have who are still using tape? Could we take a quick survey maybe if people are able to type in?
Yep, so we've had one say yes. Let me have a look 1 second. You just type in yes in the chat box if you are yes or no, maybe.
Or tape or no tape.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a few saying yes to tape, that they're still using tape. I haven't had any no's yet.
And I'm interested of those people using tape, how many are also using public cloud providers, and if they're willing to share who that public cloud provider is. I mean, maybe they could say something like tape and public cloud, or tape in AWS, or tape in Azure, or no tape. I can't actually see the questions, Amy.
I know, yeah, sorry, I can see them. So we've had a tape in AWS.
I'm quite interested to hear, you know, if people are still using tape in the data center, but they've started the public cloud journey, is this a solution that interests them?
Yeah, we've had another one that's just come through that says tape and no cloud. The majority seem to be on tape and a mixture of cloud and no cloud.
I'm interested to hear from people if, you know, if they want to email me afterwards if they've got a specific question, or, you know, what they would need, even if they don't think it's going to happen, to put this kind of solution in, and you know, hear what their objections are, what problems they think they'd encounter. But certainly, you know, we're working with cloud service providers all the time. They're very keen to work with us on this kind of thing. So if you wanted a meeting with a representative of AWS there or Azure, I'm sure we could find someone to join.
Yeah, and so, I mean, as mentioned at the beginning, for those on the call, there is a feedback form at the end, so just put any information on there if you'd like us to get back to you on anything in particular, anything that we missed, pop that in there and we can get back to you. But I don't think we've got any questions come through, so it looks like you might have covered everything, which is good, Matt. So thanks everyone for joining the webinar today, taking the time out of your busy days, and thank you, Matt, so much for presenting as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, we recorded the webinar, so I'll send you all a link to the recording, and then if you could fill out the feedback at the end, we'd really appreciate that as well. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day today. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye.